The best salt to use in fermentation is one that does not contain anti-caking agents, because these agents can cause a fermentation to fail. Read the ingredient label of the salt to see if it has anti-caking agents added. If it does, don't use that salt for fermentation. Use the product where the ingredients read salt and only salt. When I did testing with salt containing anti-caking agents, every single ferment either failed or behaved bizarrely, indicating an unnatural microbial imbalance. So what about salt with added iodine? I have always avoided using iodized salt with fermentation, but since I heard feedback from other fermenters that it worked fine, I decided to test it out for myself. Here are the results. I fermented 2 jars of cabbage, both starting on the same day, with the same salt content of 2.5% and the same source of cabbage. I followed my 4-point fermentation checklist to determine if the fermentation was safe to eat or not. First on my fermentation checklist is a visual inspection. The jar of the fermented cabbage using salt with iodine developed calm yeast, while the jar of fermented cabbage using the non-iodized salt did not. Now keep in mind, calm yeast is harmless. It's not an indicator of spoilage and is easily removed. It's very common for calm yeast to develop on many types of fermentations. Particularly, it's a common occurrence with vegetables that are high in fructans, such as onions, carrots, and cucumbers. But green cabbage is very low in fructans, and when fermented by itself, it does not develop calm yeast. That's why this calm yeast is such an odd visual sign to see when fermenting this green cabbage. Since all the factors between the two jars are the same except for the salt, this tells me there's some kind of microbial imbalance occurring caused by the iodine. The color difference is due to making the kraut on the left from the outer leaves of the cabbage, which are more green, and the kraut on the right from the inner core leaves, which are more white. Making the krauts from either outer or inner leaves from the same cabbage does not create interference to the salt experiment. However, I've made a lot of kraut from probably hundreds of cabbages over the years, and although the salt did not cause the white color, I believe the kraut on the right looks unhealthier than usual compared to other krauts I've made that were also very pale in color. Second on my fermentation checklist is a smell inspection. The jar of fermented cabbage using salt without iodine smelled soury sweet with sulfur tones, which is the correct smell of a healthy fermentation. The jar on the right with iodized salt did not smell bad per se, but it did not have that soury sweet smell. Rather, it had a very weak smell, almost like plain water. Number 3 on my fermentation checklist is pH. A pH below 4.5 on the pH scale is what I call the safety zone, because bad pathogens cannot survive in a pH below 4.5. During the fermentation process, the food being fermented should drop from a starting neutral pH to an acidic pH under 4.5, and preferably even to a pH between 3 and 4. The pH of the cabbage using non-iodized salt was 3.8. Perfect. While the pH of the fermented cabbage using iodized salt had a pH of 4.2. Now, this is technically in the safety zone, but it is a weak pH for fermented green cabbage. Number 4 on my fermentation checklist is a taste test. Only take a taste test if items 1 through 3 on the checklist pass: sight, smell, and pH. The unusual calm yeast development on this green cabbage ferment is a yellow flag. Not for other vegetables, like mentioned earlier with high fructans, but for green cabbage by itself, it is. The smell, although not rotten nor spoiled, was also not quite right, so again, another yellow flag. Then with the pH technically being in the safety zone, but rather weak for a green cabbage fermentation, well, when combined with the oddities of sight and smell that I yellow flagged, I chose to pass on the taste test. Based on the evidence of my experiment, I don't recommend using iodized salt with fermentation. As for the fermenters out there who say their ferments turn out just fine with iodized salt, that's great. Then just keep doing what you're doing. But based on my results, I choose to continue not using iodized salt with fermentation. This means you can use just about any kind of sea salt from around the world. You can use Himalayan pink salt, Redmond's real salt, kosher salt, and so on. Any of these will work great with fermentation so long as it does not contain either iodine or anti-caking agents. Simply read the ingredients label to know if the salt contains them. Go with a product whose ingredient list reads salt and only salt. Try my signature sauerkraut recipe with carrot and fresh ginger by clicking here, as well as many other delicious fermentation recipes in this playlist down here. Links provided in the description, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.